A single road once held the fate of continents in its winding path. This is the story of the Silk Road, but forget the simple image of camel caravans. We're uncovering 25 pivotal moments that transformed this route into a nerve center of history. By the end, you will see the hidden connections that shaped our modern world, from the paper in your books to the very map of nations. How did a monk's hollow staff spark an industrial revolution in another empire? What forgotten people, preserved for thousands of years in desert sands, rewrite our understanding of ancient contact? We are tracing a network of intrigue where every trade was a gamble and every traveler carried secrets. What do you believe is the most powerful thing a road can carry? The first pivotal moment was born not from commerce, but from sheer desperation. In the grand halls of the Han Dynasty court, Emperor Wu faced a constant, looming threat. To the north, the powerful and mobile Xiongnu Confederation raided his borders relentlessly. The emperor needed a strategy, a way to break their strength. His idea was audacious: find a distant ally to squeeze the Xiongnu from the other side. For this impossible mission, he chose a courtier named Zhang Qian. In the year 138 before the Common Era, Zhang Qian set out with a small party, heading west into a world of pure rumor and legend. He was not a merchant, he was a spy, a diplomat, and an explorer all in one. His mission vanished into the vast unknown for 13 long years. The Xiongnu captured him, held him for a decade, but he never forgot his duty. He eventually escaped, pressing further west instead of turning back. His travels brought him to the Fergana Valley, a land of startling wealth and strange wonders. There he saw them, the heavenly horses, powerful steeds that seemed to sweat blood, a breed far superior to anything in China. He learned of other civilizations, vast empires and bustling cities that lay beyond the deserts and mountains. When Zhang Qian finally stumbled back to the Han court, ragged and half-forgotten, he carried no chests of gold. His treasure was information. His detailed reports painted a picture of a world rich with possibilities: grapes, alfalfa, and, of course, those incredible horses. Emperor Wu listened, and his vision shifted. The initial goal of a military alliance evolved. Here was a chance not just to fight an enemy, but to connect with a network of wealth. Zhang Qian's Odyssey, a story of survival and keen observation, did not create a trade route overnight. It opened a gate in the imperial mind. For the first time, the West was not a terrifying void, but a destination. The seed for the Silk Road was planted, not by a merchant's ledger, but by a captive's careful memory. The sheer desire for a single fabric would now pull an entire network taut. Half a world away from the Han court, in the marble heart of Rome, a new obsession was taking hold. It arrived in whispers at first, a material so fine it felt like woven air, shimmering with a luster no wool or linen could match. This was Chinese silk, and it ignited a craze that swept through Roman high society. To wear silk was to broadcast immense wealth and refinement. The elite draped themselves in it, paying fortunes for bolts of this exotic cloth. The demand became so intense that Roman senators began to voice alarm. They watched as mountains of gold and silver coin flowed eastward, a seemingly endless river of Roman wealth draining away to purchase this luxury. The historian Pliny the Elder famously grumbled about the vast sums spent on silk from what he called the seers, the mysterious silk people. Yet for all their sophistication, the Romans were utterly baffled by silk's origin. They had no concept of silkworms or the intricate cultivation they required. In their minds, such a perfect material could not come from a lowly caterpillar. Wild theories flourished. The most persistent Roman belief was that silk grew on trees in a distant land, harvested as a delicate plant fiber. This profound mystery only added to silk's allure and value. That insatiable Roman demand, that powerful economic pull from the far western end of the world, provided the constant fuel for the Silk Road. It was no longer just a path of tentative exploration. It was now a highway of high-stakes commerce, where fortunes were made on the back of a Roman fantasy. But if the Romans were mystified by Silk's source, their rivals to the east were about to discover the secret in the most dramatic way possible. A road needs more than just travelers and goods, it needs a heart. For centuries, the stretch of mountains and deserts between China and Rome was a perilous no-man's land, a dangerous gap where trade could falter and die. Then a remarkable empire rose to fill that void, the Kushan Empire, controlling the rugged crossroads of modern Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northern India, became the indispensable middlemen of the ancient world. They did not merely occupy the Silk Road, they engineered it. Their power was anchored in geography, holding the keys to the most vital mountain passes like the legendary Khyber. By providing security and imposing order on the caravan traffic, they transformed lawless trails into reliable commercial highways, for a price, of course. But it was a price merchants were willing to pay for safe passage. This stability created something far more valuable than a toll road. It created a neutral zone, a cosmopolitan melting pot far from the direct control of Rome or Han China. Here, in the bustling Kushan cities, a profound cultural synthesis took place. Greek artisans, whose ancestors came with Alexander the Great, worked alongside Indian sculptors and Persian metalworkers. The result was Gandharan art, a breathtaking fusion where the serene Buddha was depicted with the graceful, realistic features of a Greek god, his robes flowing in classical Hellenistic folds. It was a visual testament to the exchange happening at every level. The Kushans, great patrons of Buddhism, turned their territory into a spiritual and intellectual crossroads. Monks, missionaries, and philosophers moved as freely as merchants, carrying sutras from India toward China and bringing new interpretations back. The Kushan hub ensured that the Silk Road carried not just silk and spices, but the very foundations of faith and philosophy. They were the vital switchboard, connecting the great civilizations at either end and making the entire network function. Without their central, stabilizing role, the Silk Road might have remained a series of dangerous, fragmented journeys. But their success also created a tantalizing target, a concentration of wealth that would soon attract the gaze of another rising power, one that preferred conquest to commerce. The road could carry more than silk and silver, it could carry the soul of a civilization. While merchants calculated profits, a different kind of traveler embarked with a far more precious cargo in mind. In the year 399, a Chinese monk named Faxian set his feet upon the Western path. His goal was not wealth, but wisdom. He sought the original Buddhist scriptures, the pure teachings he felt were fading in his homeland. His pilgrimage would become one of the most extraordinary and perilous journeys ever recorded along the Silk Road. He faced the Taklamakan Desert, a place so brutally inhospitable locals called it the Sea of Death. His writings describe a landscape of shifting sands and scorching winds, where the bones of those who lost their way served as the only markers for the path ahead. Surviving that, he then climbed into the frozen, oxygen-thin heights of the Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world. After years of relentless travel, he finally reached the heartland of Buddhism in India. He spent a decade there, meticulously copying sacred texts and studying rituals, but his true gift to history is his travelogue, a record of Buddhist kingdoms. This is not a dry religious text, it is a vibrant, first-hand account of a world in motion. Faxian describes the thriving oasis kingdoms of the Taklamakan, like Shanshan and Khatan, where he found bustling monasteries full of devout monks. He notes the languages, the customs, the generosity of kings, and the daily rhythms of life on the trade routes. His observations are a priceless snapshot, a candid camera from the early 5th century, showing us that the Silk Road was a living corridor of faith. Monasteries functioned as hostels, libraries, and centers of exchange where philosophical ideas flowed as freely as wine. Faxian's journey proves that the most powerful forces moving along these routes were often intangible. He traveled for enlightenment, and in doing so, he illuminated the very nature of the road itself. It was a spiritual highway where devotion could propel a person further than any desire for gold. And as these routes carried faith eastward, they would soon carry something else back, a technology so transformative it would alter the balance of power across continents. While monks and emperors set the stage, the daily lifeblood of the Silk Road flowed through a different people entirely. From their vibrant cities of Samarkand and Bukhara in the heart of Central Asia, the Sogdian merchants built an invisible empire of commerce and connection. For centuries, they were the essential professionals of the ancient world, the cosmopolitan glue that held the entire network together. Think of them not as simple caravan drivers, but as a sophisticated international guild. They were bankers who could arrange credit from one oasis to the next. They were linguists, fluent in the tongues of every kingdom they passed through. They were diplomats skilled at navigating the complex courts of Tang China, the Persian Empire, and even distant Byzantium. Their success was built on a web of trust and information. They established far-flung trading colonies in every major city along the routes, from the bustling capital of Chang'an in China to the markets of Constantinople. These were not just warehouses, they were intelligence hubs, places where news of political unrest, a bad harvest, or a new luxury demand would travel faster than any official courier. A Sogdian merchant in China would know the price of pepper in Persia before the local governor did. They even developed their own script, used for drafting binding contracts and keeping meticulous records, a precursor to a truly international commercial language. And they carried more than goods. As they moved, they became accidental missionaries, spreading minority faiths like Manichaeism and Nestorian Christianity deep into Central Asia and China, their beliefs traveling in the same saddlebags as their bolts of cloth. Yet this vast, powerful network was heartbreakingly fragile. A single, poignant discovery brings this home. Archaeologists found a collection of Sogdian letters in a Chinese frontier fort, abandoned and forgotten. One, written by a merchant stranded far from home, carries a desperate message. He laments the sack of his beloved Samarkand by nomadic raiders, pleading for help and worrying over lost family and investments. In that raw, personal fear, we see the truth behind the Silk Road's grandeur. For all its power and reach, it was sustained by ordinary people facing extraordinary risks, their personal fortunes and hearts forever tied to the winds that swept across the deserts. Their mastery made the world smaller, but it could not make it safe, and just as their system reached its peak, a storm was gathering in the Arabian desert that would rewrite all the rules, connecting the world with a speed and unity never before seen. The desperation for silk in Rome had been a distant economic drain, but for the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, it was a pressing crisis close to home. His magnificent capital, Constantinople, demanded the finest silks for its court and churches, yet the empire's wealth was hemorrhaging. The problem was a stranglehold. All silk had to come through the old Persian Sasanian Empire, Byzantium's bitter rival. The Persians controlled the routes and charged exorbitant prices, turning a simple luxury into a weapon of economic warfare. Justinian needed a solution, a way to break the monopoly at its source. He found it not in armies or treaties, but in a whispered rumor and an act of breathtaking audacity. The story, preserved by the historian Procopius, centers on two unnamed Nestorian monks. These men were not strangers to long journeys. having previously traveled to the lands of Serinda, a term often meaning China or its western frontiers. They understood the secret everyone in the West still wondered about, the true origin of silk. They knew it came not from trees, but from the careful cultivation of tiny silkworms that fed on mulberry leaves. Returning to Constantinople, they presented themselves to the emperor with a bold proposal. They claimed they could bring the secret of silk production directly to him. Justinian, grasping at any chance, promised them a fortune. The monks then embarked on a return journey east, a mission of industrial espionage cloaked in religious travel. Their challenge was immense. The Chinese state guarded the secrets of sericulture with extreme severity. Exporting silkworms or eggs was a capital offense. The monks' ingenious solution was both simple and daring. They hollowed out their sturdy bamboo pilgrim staves and carefully placed inside them the most precious contraband in the world, live silkworm eggs or perhaps even tiny larvae. They packed them with mulberry leaves for sustenance and began the long, perilous trek back west. Every checkpoint, every curious official was a potential death sentence. Yet, the story goes, they succeeded. They arrived in Constantinople around the year 552 and presented Justinian with the living foundation of an empire's new industry. The impact was seismic. With the worms and the monks' knowledge of their care, Byzantium could now produce its own silk. Almost overnight, the Persian stranglehold was broken. Imperial workshops sprang up, and Byzantine silk, renowned for its exquisite quality and intricate patterns, became a legendary commodity in its own right. This moment, whether perfectly factual or embellished by legend, reveals a fundamental truth about the Silk Road. It was never just a passive channel for trade. It was an arena for technological warfare where the greatest prize was not the finished product, but the knowledge of how to make it. The hollow staff of a monk did more than carry insects. It carried the end of one monopoly and the birth of an economic revolution that would ripple through the Mediterranean for centuries to come. If the hollowed staff of a monk was a secret, then the city it helped supply became the most spectacularly open secret in the world. By the 7th and 8th centuries, the eastern anchor of the Silk Road was not a mere trading post, but a vision of global unity made real in wood and stone. Chang'an, the capital of China's Tang dynasty, was the largest city on Earth, a meticulously planned universe of over 1 million souls. Its layout was a masterpiece of imperial order, a vast grid of 108 walled wards and arrow-straight avenues wide enough for 9 chariots to ride abreast. But within this rigid geometry pulsed a chaos of human energy from every corner of the known world. The true heart of this global exchange was the Western market. Step inside its gates, and the air itself was a tapestry of scent and sound. The sharp tang of Central Asian horses mixed with the sweet perfume of Persian rosewater and the earthy aroma of exotic spices piled high in sacks. You could barter for bolts of vivid Sogdian brocade, admire intricate silverware from the workshops of Sasanian Iran, or sample dates and raisins from the oases of the Taklamakan. This was not a simple bazaar, it was a permanent world's fair, and the people were as diverse as the goods. A Uyghur merchant, his language a Turkic dialect, might haggle with a Chinese official in fluent Sogdian, the lingua franca of commerce, while a Korean student hurried past to his studies at the Imperial College. The spiritual landscape of Chang'an mirrored its commercial one. Alongside soaring Buddhist pagodas stood the distinct fire altars of Zoroastrian temples where Persian traders honored their god of light. Nestorian Christian churches, with their distinctive Syrian crosses, held services for communities from Syria and Central Asia. By the mid-8th century, the first Muslim mosques began to rise, serving Arab merchants and soldiers who had traveled the vast distance from the caliphate. This was the Tang dynasty's supreme confidence, an openness that actively welcomed talent from abroad. Foreigners were not just tolerated, they could achieve fame and power. Persian and Central Asian musicians revolutionized court music with new instruments and melodies. Sogdian military commanders led Tang armies, their loyalty sworn to the emperor in Chang'an, not to any distant homeland. For a glorious century, this city demonstrated that the end of a road did not have to be a barrier, it could be a magnificent synthesis. Chang'an was the ultimate proof that the Silk Road was not just a line on a map, but a force that could reshape a civilization into something brilliantly and briefly cosmopolitan. Yet this dazzling openness rested on a foundation of immense military power, a power that was about to be tested on a distant, wind-swept frontier where the fate of the entire network would hang in the balance. The dazzling openness of Chang'an was protected by the longest arm of imperial power. Far to the west, in the valley of the Talas River, the Tang dynasty's frontier met a new and formidable force. The year was 751. On one side stood a Tang army, a mix of regular troops and allied nomadic cavalry, representing the easternmost reach of Chinese ambition. Facing them was the expanding might of the Abbasid Caliphate, the new power of the Islamic world surging eastward from Baghdad. They were two superpowers on a collision course in the heart of Central Asia, fighting for control of the rich Silk Road oases. The battle was fierce, a brutal contest of steel and strategy, but for the Tang it was a disaster. Their nomadic allies, the Karluks, switched sides at a critical moment, sealing their fate. The Chinese army was shattered, its survivors captured or scattered. This defeat at Talas was a quiet, earth-shaking moment. It marked the permanent end of China's westward expansion. The cultural and political influence that had flowed so freely from Chang'an would now recede, its frontier hardening, yet history often works in sideways motions. The true pivot of Talas was not in the battle's outcome, but in what was left behind in its chaotic aftermath. Among the thousands of Chinese prisoners taken by the Abbasid forces were men with a very specific and utterly priceless skill. They were not generals or nobles, they were artisans, craftsmen who knew the secret of turning mulberry bark and hemp into smooth, durable sheets of paper. The victorious Abbasids, recognizing the value of their captives, did not imprison them. They transported these papermakers over 1,000 miles to the glittering city of Samarkand, a jewel of their empire. There, they were ordered to establish a workshop. Using the local abundance of flax and hemp, they built the first paper mill in the Islamic world. This was the moment paper broke free from its Chinese cradle. The technology spread like wildfire. Within decades, paper mills sprang up in Baghdad, then Damascus, then Cairo. The impact was nothing short of revolutionary. Parchment made from scarce and expensive animal skins had limited the spread of books and records. Paper, cheap and plentiful, democratized knowledge. It fueled an explosion of administration, allowing the vast caliphate to be governed with unprecedented efficiency. It created a boom in scholarship as libraries swelled with copied texts of Greek philosophy, Persian poetry, Indian mathematics, and Islamic law. The very intellectual flourishing of the Islamic Golden Age was written on pages made possible by those captured artisans, so a military defeat on a remote riverbank became an incalculable cultural victory. The Silk Road, in its brutal way, had performed its deepest function. It transferred not just a commodity, but the very means of recording thought itself. And as paper traveled west, another, more chilling transfer was about to occur in the opposite direction, carrying not innovation, but devastation. A military defeat at Talas had checked China's western reach, but a new threat was rising from the roof of the world. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the Tibetan Empire emerged as a formidable power. its warriors descending from the high plateaus to conquer the very lifelines of trade. They seized control of the southern Silk Road, the vital arteries running through the Tarim Basin oasis cities like Khatan and Kashgar. For the Tang dynasty, this was a strategic nightmare. The lush, fertile valleys of the Tibetan heartland were now a base from which to dominate the southern flank of the Silk Road, severing China's direct access to the wealth of Central Asia. This was not a mere raid, it was a lasting geopolitical shift. The Tibetan Empire became an alternative power center, a kingdom that now taxed the caravans, hosted its own mix of cultures, and funneled Buddhism directly from India into its high-altitude capital of Lhasa. The traditional map of influence was redrawn, forcing trade and diplomacy to navigate a powerful new player who controlled the mountain passes, yet even as one route faced new masters, another corridor found unlikely guardians far to the north. The chaos of the Anlushan rebellion in the mid-8th century had brought the Tang dynasty to its knees, its own armies unable to crush the revolt. In desperation, the emperor turned to a nomadic confederation from the Mongolian steppes, the Uyghur Khaganate. Their fierce cavalry turned the tide, saving the Tang capital, but the price was steep. The Uyghurs were paid in staggering quantities of silk, which they did not hoard but used as their primary economic instrument. They became the essential horse traders to the Tang, exchanging tens of thousands of sturdy steppe ponies for mountains of silk bolts. This created a peculiar and symbiotic partnership. The Uyghurs, now fantastically wealthy and entrenched in key northern cities, took on the role of protectors. They secured the northern Silk Road corridors that ran through the steppe, routes that bypassed the troubled Tibetan-controlled south. For the weakened Tang, it was an awkward but necessary arrangement, a tense alliance that kept goods flowing even as political power shifted. The empire paid for its survival with silk, and in return, the Uyghur horsemen became the armed guarantors of a northern lifeline. These two simultaneous shifts, the Tibetan grip on the south and the Uyghur stewardship of the north, reveal the Silk Road's fluid reality. It was never a single road under one empire's control, but a network constantly rerouted by ambition and necessity, where today's trading partner could be tomorrow's overlord, and the flow of silk could buy an army's loyalty or secure a kingdom's frontier. The sprawling network of trade needed a guide, and one man in the bustling capital of Baghdad decided to write it. In the 9th century, a senior official named Ibn Khordad Bey served as the director of posts and intelligence for the mighty Abbasid Caliphate. His job gave him access to the empire's most sensitive information, from the movements of armies to the reports of spies. He channeled this unique knowledge into a remarkable work, the Book of Roads and Kingdoms. This was far more than a simple list of towns. It was the first comprehensive administrative manual of the Silk Road, a view from the very heart of the system that kept it all running. Think of it as a combination of a merchant's almanac, a government travel advisory, and a secret service dossier. Ibn Khordad Bey meticulously catalogued the major routes, providing the vital intelligence every caravan master needed. He listed the distances between stops in precise parasangs, a Persian unit of measurement. He noted the locations of secure caravanserais where travelers could rest, and he detailed the tariffs and taxes imposed by different kingdoms. For a merchant planning a journey from Baghdad to the edge of China, this book was priceless, turning a voyage of rumor into one of calculated risk. But the most astonishing revelation in his pages is not about geography, but about people. Ibn Khordad Bey provides our clearest record of the Ratanites, a network of Jewish merchants whose operations seem almost impossibly vast. According to his account, these traders spoke a multitude of languages, from Arabic and Persian to Greek and the Romance tongues of Europe. They operated with a breathtaking range, organizing caravans that moved along 4 distinct routes. One path went overland through Frankish Europe and the Slavic lands. Another sailed from Egypt down the Red Sea and across the Indian Ocean. A third crossed the Mediterranean to Constantinople before heading east, and a fourth journeyed the entire span of Central Asia to reach the markets of Tang, China. They carried everything from the expected silks and spices to more unusual cargo like eunuchs and Slavic slaves destined for courts in the Islamic world. What makes the Radhanites so pivotal is their unique position. As a minority community with established connections across the Christian, Muslim, and even pagan worlds, they could navigate political and religious boundaries that might stop others. They were the ultimate neutral carriers in an age of rising empires and sectarian divides, a living web of commerce that proved the Silk Road was, at its core, a system built on practical trust and specialized knowledge. Ibn Khordadbeh's map was not drawn on parchment, but woven from the journeys of these men. It showed that the true power of the route lay not in the empires that claimed it, but in the invisible, resilient networks that moved through them, carrying the world's goods on their backs. And as this sophisticated system hummed along, a single, catastrophic event was about to prove just how interconnected that world had truly become. Buried for centuries, a single stone would speak of a lost chapter. In the spring of 1625, near the ancient Tang capital of Chang'an, workers unearthed a massive limestone slab. It stood over 9 feet tall and weighed 2 tons, a silent giant from a forgotten past. When scholars brushed away the dirt, they were stunned. The surface was covered in elegant Chinese characters, but running vertically down the center was a column of text in a strange, curling script Syriac, the liturgical language of a Christian church from the Middle East. This was the Nestorian stele, and its message, carved in the year 781, was a time capsule of breathtaking scope. It told the story of a faith that had traveled the entire Silk Road. The inscription begins with a majestic proclamation, a monument commemorating the propagation of the luminous religion from Deccan, using the ancient Chinese term for the Roman Empire. It details how a missionary named Alopan arrived in Chang'an in the year 635, welcomed by the Tang Emperor Taizong. The emperor, impressed by the monk's teachings, ordered a translation of the scriptures and gave official approval for the faith to be preached. For the next 150 years, this luminous religion flourished. The stele lists the names of bishops and priests, describes the building of monasteries in major cities, and even weaves Christian theology with Taoist and Buddhist concepts, calling God the uncreated Lord of the universe, and using terms like the true emptiness to describe the divine nature. It is a record of a Christianity that adapted, that sought to explain itself within a Chinese philosophical framework, centuries before any Jesuit set foot in Beijing. Then the stone falls silent. Its burial is the great mystery. By the mid-9th century, a wave of persecution against foreign religions swept China. Was the stele carefully hidden by the faithful to protect this proof of their long, sanctioned history from being destroyed, or was it toppled and forgotten as the community itself dispersed? The stone does not say. Its rediscovery in the 17th century caused a sensation in Europe, challenging the very narrative of Christian history. Here was irrefutable, physical proof that the Silk Road was a conduit for ideas as much as for spices, that deep cultural exchange was not just possible, but had thrived under imperial patronage. It revealed a world where a Syrian monk could find a home in a Chinese court, and where a faith could cross continents and find new words to express its eternal truths. This limestone witness reminds us that the most fragile things carried along those routes, beliefs, stories, identities, could leave the most enduring marks. A faith carved in stone could survive burial, but a city built of paper and wisdom faced a far more final fate. In the year 1258, an unstoppable force arrived at the gates of a civilization's heart. The Mongol armies, led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, surrounded the legendary city of Baghdad, crown jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate. For centuries, this had been the intellectual capital of the world, a place where the great library known as the House of Wisdom had preserved and expanded the knowledge of the Greeks, Persians, and Indians. What followed was not just a conquest, but a cataclysm. The siege was merciless, and the city's fall was absolute. Chronicles describe streets running with blood, the slaughter of hundreds of thousands, and the caliph himself rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses. The Mongols, seeing no value in books, threw the priceless manuscripts of the House of Wisdom into the Tigris River. It is said the water ran black with ink for days, a chilling metaphor for the drowning of an age of learning. This was the single most destructive event in the history of the Silk Road, an act of cultural annihilation that seemed to sever the very thread of progress. Yet from this unimaginable ruin, a new and paradoxical reality was born. The Mongols did not stop at Baghdad. They kept going, forging the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen, stretching from the edges of Europe to the Sea of Japan. And with that empire came an unexpected consequence, the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. The very brutality that leveled cities also eliminated the tangled web of warring kingdoms, corrupt local lords, and predatory bandits that had plagued the Silk Road for centuries. For the first time, a single enforced legal code governed the entire overland route from the Black Sea to the new Mongol capital of Khanbalik, what we now call Beijing. A merchant from Venice could now travel with a golden passport called a paisa, a safe conduct pass that demanded protection and assistance from any official across thousands of miles. The routes were patrolled, the caravanserais were secure, and the taxes were standardized. The Silk Road became, in a grim twist of fate, safer and more efficient than it had ever been before. The Mongol peace was a piece of the sword, but it was a peace nonetheless, one that reopened the arteries of exchange on a scale never before possible. So the ashes of Baghdad fertilized a new, terrifying, and open world. But what happens when this unprecedented safety invites not just silk and silver, but an unseen and deadly passenger? Security under the Mongol peace was a double-edged sword, for it cleared the path not only for goods, but for the most extraordinary travelers the world had ever known. Two men, moving in opposite directions along the same secured routes, would come to define this era of unprecedented connection. From the west came a young Venetian merchant named Marco Polo. In the year 1271, he set out with his father and uncle, seasoned traders who had already met the Great Khan. Their journey was an epic of endurance, crossing the deserts of Persia, scaling the Pamir Mountains, and traversing the Taklamakan, all while navigating the complex politics of the Mongol realms. After 3.5 grueling years, they arrived at the summer palace of Kublai Khan in Shangdu, the fabled Xanadu. The young Marco possessed a keen eye and a remarkable memory. He entered the service of the Khan, who employed him as an envoy for 17 years, sending him on missions across the vast Yuan dynasty. Polo's travelogue, written after his return to Venice, burst upon a Europe hungry for knowledge of the distant East. He described cities of staggering wealth, where paper money was used instead of gold, where coal was burned for heat, and a postal system of swift horsemen spanned a continent. He told of the grandeur of Hangzhou, a city of canals and bridges he called the finest and noblest in the world. His accounts of the spices, silks, and technologies of Cathay were so detailed, so fantastical to European ears, that many dismissed them as the lies of a fabulist. Yet his very nickname, Il Malayani, speaks to the scale of the wonders he reported. Whether every detail was firsthand or gathered from the tales of other travelers, his book created a lasting map in the European imagination, a vision of Oriental splendor that would inspire explorers for centuries. Moving east to west along that same Mongol highway was a journey just as remarkable, yet almost forgotten in the West. Rabban Bar Sama was a Nestorian Christian monk born in the great capital of Khanbalik, modern-day Beijing. In the late 13th century, he embarked on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem with a younger disciple. His path was the mirror image of Marco Polo's. Traveling with the blessing and safe conduct of the Mongol Ilkhanate, he crossed Central Asia into Persia. Political turmoil blocked his route to Jerusalem, but it opened a far more unexpected door. The Ilkhan, seeking a Christian alliance against the Muslims, appointed Bar Sama as his ambassador to the monarchs of Europe. This monk from China thus found himself riding into the heart of Christendom. He met the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, traveled to Rome where he had lengthy theological discussions with the cardinals, and journeyed on to Paris where he was received with great honor by King Philip IV. He even crossed the Channel to Gascony, then held by the English king, Edward I, before whom he celebrated the Nestorian Eucharist. His detailed memoir, written in Persian, offers a breathtaking reverse view. He describes the Gothic splendor of European cathedrals, the politics of papal succession, and the martial pride of the French and English kings, all through the eyes of a cultured outsider from the Far East. Where Marco Polo brought the East to the West, Rabban Bar Sama brought the West, in all its complexity, into the historical record of Asia. Together, their crisscrossing journeys represent the pinnacle of the Silk Road as a true two-way street. It was a brief moment when a monk from Beijing could celebrate Mass before the King of England, and a merchant from Venice could govern a Chinese city, all under the watchful peace of the Mongol Khans. This open world, however, was balanced on a knife's edge, and the very forces that enabled these travels were already beginning to unravel. The open world of the Pax Mongolica carried a hidden, lethal cost. For all the silks and spices that flowed along those secure routes, the most transformative cargo traveled silently in the grain sacks of Mongol supply trains and in the fur of black rats. This was Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague. Originating in the rodent populations of the Central Asian steppes, the disease found its perfect vector in the unprecedented connectivity of the Mongol Empire. Flea-infested rodents stowed away in shipments of grain and cloth, moving with terrifying efficiency from caravan to caravanserai, from oasis city to bustling port. The very efficiency that made merchants rich now served a microscopic passenger. The plague reached the shores of the Black Sea in the 1340s at the Genos trading fortress of Kaffa in Crimea. Here, history and legend collide in a chilling episode. A Mongol army besieging the city was itself ravaged by the disease. According to the Italian chronicler Gabriele de Mussi, the Mongol commander, in a desperate and monstrous act, ordered the corpses of his own dead soldiers to be catapulted over the walls into the besieged city. Whether this act of primitive biological warfare was the precise trigger or not, the result was certain: the plague exploded within the crowded port. Panicked Genos sailors fled on their galleys, carrying the sickness with them across the Mediterranean. Their first stop was Messina, Sicily, in October 1347. From that single infected point of contact, the Black Death erupted across Europe like a wildfire. The scale of the devastation is almost beyond comprehension. Within just a few years, it wiped out an estimated 30 to 50% of Europe's population. Whole villages were left empty, fields lay fallow, and the social order was shattered. But this was not merely a European catastrophe. The pandemic swept along the entire Silk Road network in all directions, devastating populations in the Middle East, China, and Central Asia with similar ferocity. The plague did not discriminate between merchant and monk, Khan or peasant. This moment is the darkest testament to the Silk Road's power. It proved, with horrific finality, that connectivity was a double-edged sword. The same routes that traded in enlightenment and luxury could also serve as a superhighway for apocalyptic suffering. The demographic and psychological shockwaves of the Black Death would fundamentally end the medieval world, creating labor shortages that empowered common people, shaking the foundations of the church, and forcing a desperate search for new solutions. And as Europe lay shattered in the plague's aftermath, that search for new routes and new wealth would soon set the stage for the very end of the overland Silk Road itself. The very openness that had carried the plague was now seen as a fatal vulnerability. With the Mongol Yuan dynasty swept away, the new Ming emperors faced a world in recovery, and their response was a profound and historic retreat. The early Ming did, for a brief moment, look outward with breathtaking ambition. Under the Yongle Emperor, the colossal treasure fleets of the Admiral Zhang, he sailed the Indian Ocean between 1405 and 1433. These were not mere trading vessels, they were floating cities of diplomacy and awe, carrying silks and porcelain to display Ming supremacy from Java to the coast of Africa. Yet this maritime venture was an exception, a final burst of expansive energy. The pivotal turn came swiftly after Zhang He's last voyage. The court, now dominated by conservative Confucian scholar officials, made a calculated and decisive choice. They turned their backs on the sea and locked their gaze inward. The reasons were a potent mix of fear, philosophy, and finance. The perennial threat from the northern steppes had not vanished with the Mongols. Fearing a resurgence, the Ming embarked on the monumental, ruinously expensive project of rebuilding and fortifying the Great Wall into the imposing stone barrier we recognize today. This defensive mindset consumed imperial resources and attention. Simultaneously, the prevailing Confucian ideology at court held a deep disdain for commerce and the merchant class. Trade was seen as a corrupting, petty pursuit compared to the noble work of farming and scholarly administration. Engaging with barbarian states through tribute was acceptable as a symbol of Chinese superiority, but open, equal exchange was ideologically repugnant. This philosophy crystallized into the official policy of Heijin, the sea ban. Private overseas trade was outlawed, and coastal populations were even forcibly relocated inland to prevent contact. The goal was absolute control and internal stability, eliminating unpredictable foreign influences and potential piracy. The consequence for the Silk Road was slow asphyxiation. For centuries, the colossal Chinese economy had been the engine of the entire system. Its insatiable demand for horses, jade, and luxuries, and its boundless supply of silk, porcelain, and tea fueled the caravans. Now the state withdrew its patronage and its demand, the official trade mission ceased, the flow of silver, the lifeblood of long-distance commerce, slowed to a trickle. The overland Silk Road did not vanish in a day, but its economic heart grew fainter with each passing decade. The great oasis cities, once thriving on the transit of goods, began to wither. The Ming decision was a vote for isolation over interaction, for walls over waves. It left a vacuum of power and purpose along the ancient routes, a vacuum that other nations, approaching from a very different direction, were already racing to fill. The Ming withdrawal created a vacuum, but the final decisive blow to the old overland world came from a single, thunderous event. In the spring of 1453, the mighty walls of Constantinople, which had stood for 1,000 years, shook under a relentless bombardment. The city was the last gasp of the Roman Empire, a Christian island in a rising Ottoman sea, and it held a position of immense strategic value. For European merchants, it was the gateway. Goods arriving via the Silk Road from Central Asia would flow into its markets, then be shipped across the Black Sea and into the Mediterranean, reaching the trading houses of Venice and Genoa. The siege, led by the young Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, was a masterclass in military engineering and sheer force of will. He dragged warships overland to bypass the city's sea chains, and he employed massive cannons, one so large it was said to require 60 oxen to move, to pound the ancient Theodosian walls day and night. After 53 days, the defenses finally broke, the Ottoman forces poured into the city, and the last Byzantine emperor died fighting in the streets. The fall of Constantinople was more than the end of an empire, it was the slamming shut of a door. The Ottomans now controlled both sides of the Bosporus Strait, the vital choke point between Europe and Asia. They immediately severed direct European access to the Black Sea and the overland caravan routes that fed into it. Overnight, the traditional land bridge to the riches of the East was placed firmly under Ottoman control. For European merchants, the consequences were immediate and painful. Spices like pepper, cloves, and nutmeg, which had traveled through Persian and Arab middlemen before reaching Constantinople, now passed through an additional, powerful Ottoman layer. Each handoff added taxes, tariffs, and markups. The price of these coveted goods in European markets began to soar, becoming a luxury only the very richest could afford. This economic stranglehold created a desperate need. If the land route was closed and controlled by a rival power, the only logical solution was to find another way. The search for a sea route to Asia, bypassing the Ottomans entirely, shifted from a speculative dream to an urgent geopolitical and economic necessity. The fall of Constantinople did not just change the map, it changed the very direction of history, pushing European eyes away from the familiar continents and out toward the vast, uncharted oceans. The price of pepper in Lisbon was about to plummet. While the Ottomans tightened their grip on the land, a small kingdom on the edge of Europe had been quietly plotting a maritime end run around the entire continent. For decades, Portuguese navigators, sponsored by Prince Henry, had inched down the West African coast, mastering the winds of the Atlantic. Their goal was not just exploration, but a direct, ocean-borne strike at the source of the spice trade. The man chosen to complete this mission was Vasco da Gama. In July 1497, he led a tiny fleet of 4 ships around the treacherous Cape of Good Hope, a place his crew called the Cape of Storms. The voyage was a nightmare of scurvy, starvation, and mutinous whispers. For over 10 months, they sailed into a void, their only map a mixture of hope and fragmented reports. Then, in May 1498, they sighted the Malabar coast of India. They had done it. They had reached the legendary spice markets by sea, but Da Gama was no Marco Polo, arriving with curiosity. He was a harbinger of a new, violent age of commerce. His reception in the bustling port of Calicut was tense. The local Hindu ruler, the Zamorin, was unimpressed by the trinkets Da Gama offered, cheap cloth and wash basins, in a market accustomed to the finest gold and silver. The Portuguese captain, arrogant and frustrated, soon resorted to intimidation, kidnapping local fishermen and even bombarding the city before finally securing a modest cargo of pepper and cinnamon. His return to Lisbon in 1499 was a triumph of a different order. Of his 170 men, only 55 survived, but the hold of his remaining ship was packed with spices. When sold, the cargo's value was 60 times the cost of the entire expedition. The economic calculation was brutally clear. One armed carrack sailing around Africa could now carry the spice equivalent of an entire overland caravan that would have taken 2 years, paid a dozen tolls to rival kingdoms, and braved bandits and deserts. The ocean route was faster, cheaper, and, with enough cannons, controllable. This was the knockout punch. The Portuguese did not seek to join the existing Silk Road network. They aimed to seize its terminals by force. They swiftly established a chain of fortified trading posts, from Goa in India to Malacca in Southeast Asia. Their massive, cannon-laden carracks patrolled the Indian Ocean, demanding passes from traditional Arab and Indian traders and sinking those who refused. For the first time, a single European power could dictate terms at the very sources of production, redirecting the flow of pepper, cloves, and nutmeg directly around Africa to Europe, bypassing the Ottomans, the Venetians, and every middleman in between. The ancient overland arteries, already weakened, began to wither from disuse. The wealth that had once flowed through Samarkand and Baghdad now flowed around the Cape, and with it, the center of global power began its decisive shift from the heart of Asia to the coasts of the Atlantic. Yet, in this rush to dominate the spice trade, the Portuguese had unlocked a far greater and more dangerous geography, one that would soon pull the gaze of an entire continent westward toward lands the Silk Road had never known. Deep in the shifting sands of the Taklamakan, a city once thrived on secrets and stone. This was Cotton, a legendary oasis kingdom on the southern Silk Road that became synonymous with two of the ancient world's most coveted treasures. For centuries, it served as the primary source for the finest nephrite jade in all of Asia, a stone of profound spiritual and cultural significance to China. Emperors believed jade possessed protective, even immortal qualities, and the pure white mutton fat jade from Cotton's riverbeds was considered the most potent of all. This demand created a river of green and white stone flowing eastward, a trade so vital it predated even the silk trade itself, but Cotton's second secret was even more closely guarded. Local legend, recorded by the pilgrim Xuanzang centuries later, tells a story of industrial espionage that rivals the Byzantine monk tale. It claims a Cottonese king, desperate to break China's silk monopoly, proposed marriage to a Chinese princess. His request was accepted, but with a condition: she could not bring silkworms. The clever princess, loyal to her new home, hid silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds within the folds of her elaborate headdress. She smuggled them past the imperial guards, and thus, the story goes, sericulture was born beyond China's borders in Cotton. Whether myth or veiled truth, the tale underscores Cotton's role as a crucial link in China's technological monopoly, a place where the secret of silk began its slow seep westward. For a time, this combination of jade and illicit silk production made Cotton magnificently wealthy, a glittering Buddhist kingdom where Sanskrit texts were translated and grand monasteries rose beside bustling markets. Then, the desert reclaimed its own, a combination of shifting river courses, deforestation, and perhaps the disruption of trade routes slowly strangled the city. The life-giving water vanished, the sands advanced, and Cotton was gradually abandoned, its libraries and palaces buried. For generations, it lived on only in travelers' tales as a lost city of impossible riches, a phantom of the southern route that proved even the most prosperous oasis was just one drought away from becoming a mirage. The desert held its secrets in perfect, frozen silence. At the dawn of the 20th century, explorers and archaeologists probing the fringes of the Taklamakan began to uncover something that defied all historical understanding. They found bodies, but not mere skeletons. These were mummies, preserved with stunning fidelity by the dry, salty sands. They were astonishingly old, some dating back 4,000 years, to a time before the Great Pyramids of Giza were even built. The first sight of them was a shock. These ancient people had long noses, high cheekbones, and hair ranging from blonde to reddish-brown, unmistakably Caucasoid features. They were dressed in finely woven woolen clothing, some in brilliantly colored tartan patterns that looked like they belonged in Celtic Europe, not the heart of Asia. Who were these people, and what were they doing here? Thousands of years before the Silk Road was even a concept, this was the enigma of the Tarim mummies. They pointed to a lost civilization scholars would come to call the Tocharians. These were an Indo-European people, distant linguistic cousins to the Greeks, Romans, and Celts, who had somehow made a home in the Tarim Basin oasis cities like Kucha and Turfan. Their language, Ticharian, deciphered from manuscripts found in Buddhist monasteries centuries later, confirmed their origins. It was an Indo-European tongue, but one that had traveled the farthest east of all, sitting in grammatical isolation amidst Chinese and Turkic languages. The implications are staggering. This discovery rewrites the timeline of human movement. It proves that deep cultural and genetic exchange along these inner Asian corridors was not a product of the Han Dynasty or the Roman Empire. It was happening 2,000 years earlier in the Bronze Age. Small, resilient communities were already traversing these deserts, trading goods and ideas, weaving European-style textiles, and settling in what would become the future hubs of the Silk Road. Their very presence turns the Taklamakan from a mere barrier into an ancient crossroads. Why did they come? Was it a search for precious jade, a shift in climate, or simply the relentless human urge to explore? The mummies do not say, they simply lie in state, their colorful plaids still vibrant, their features eternally foreign to the land that preserved them. They are the ultimate proof that the story of East and West is far older and far more intertwined than any history book dared to suggest. A library can be a fortress, its books hidden like treasure. In the stark cliffs outside the oasis town of Dunhuang, hundreds of man-made caves were carved into the rock face over 1,000 years. This was the Mogao Caves, a sprawling sanctuary of Buddhist art known as the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas. For centuries, monks, pilgrims, and artists filled these grottos with breathtaking murals and sculptures, a visual symphony of faith along the Silk Road. Then, around the year 1000, one small cave, numbered 17, was used for a different purpose. Its entrance was carefully bricked up and plastered over, then painted with a mural to blend seamlessly with the cliff face. There it sat, a silent, forgotten vault, for 900 years. Its rediscovery is a story of pure chance. In the summer of 1900, a Taoist monk named Wang Yuanlu, who had appointed himself the complex's caretaker, was attempting restoration work in a main cave. As he cleaned away sand that had drifted in, a section of the wall cracked open, revealing not solid rock, but a dark, hidden space behind it. Lighting a makeshift torch, Wang peered inside. The flickering light fell upon a mountain of bundled manuscripts, stacked from floor to ceiling in a chamber no larger than a walk-in closet. He had stumbled upon the single greatest time capsule of the ancient world. The Dunhuang Library Cave contained an estimated 40,000 items. It was not a curated collection of only holy texts, but a chaotic, magnificent jumble of an entire civilization's paper trail. There were exquisite Buddhist sutras copied in gold ink on indigo paper and delicate paintings on silk banners depicting bodhisattvas, but alongside these were students' handwriting practice sheets, legal contracts for the sale of a camel, personal letters filled with family gossip, and even a detailed guide to the proper etiquette for drinking tea. The languages span the known world: Chinese, Tibetan, Sogdian, Sanskrit, Uyghur, and even Hebrew. The religions represented were just as diverse, with texts from Buddhism, Taoism, Nestorian Christianity, and the nearly vanished faith of Manichaeism all resting side by side, preserved in the dry desert air. This was not a library in the formal sense. It was a recycling bin, a storeroom for sacred texts that were too worn for ritual use, but too holy to simply throw away, mixed with the mundane paperwork of daily life that had accumulated over centuries. But why was it sealed? The most compelling theory points to a looming threat. In the early 11th century, the Tangut kingdom of Xia was expanding westward, and Dunhuang lay in its path. Fearing an invasion that might desecrate their sacred writings, the monks of Mogao made a desperate decision. They gathered their most precious and vulnerable manuscripts, along with the community's archives, and sealed them in this secret chamber, hoping to return for them when the danger passed. That day never came. The cave was forgotten, its contents frozen in time. When Wang Yuanlu broke the seal 9 centuries later, he opened a window onto the Silk Road's soul, revealing not just the grand doctrines that traveled the routes, but the receipts, the doodles, and the heartfelt letters that prove it was lived by real people. Europe's great rebirth was built with tools from the distant East. We often frame the Renaissance as a rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman wisdom, and it was. But that rediscovery, and the explosion of innovation that followed, was powered by a set of transformative technologies that arrived in Europe via the very same Silk Road networks that were now fading. These were not just exotic curiosities, they were fundamental instruments of change. First, consider paper. Remember those captured artisans from the Battle of Talas who brought papermaking to Samarkand. That knowledge traveled through the Islamic world, reaching Sicily and Spain by the 12th century. By the 14th century, paper mills in Italy were producing sheets far cheaper and more plentiful than parchment. This was the essential substrate. Without affordable paper, the mass production of books, the circulation of new ideas, and the very practice of scholarship that defined the Renaissance would have remained the exclusive domain of a wealthy few cloistered in monasteries. The printing press, invented by Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, would have been a solution without a problem if it had only expensive animal skins to print on. Paper made the printing revolution, and thus the democratization of knowledge, economically possible. Then came the compass, invented in China during the Han Dynasty for the mystical practice of geomancy. It was being used for maritime navigation by the 11th century. This knowledge traveled west through Arab traders and sailors, reaching the Mediterranean. In the hands of European navigators, the magnetic compass became the key that unlocked open ocean travel. It allowed sailors to venture beyond the sight of land with confidence, directly enabling the age of discovery that followed the Renaissance. Vasco da Gama and Columbus did not set sail blindly, they followed a needle pointing north, a technology born from Chinese Taoist philosophy. Perhaps the most dramatic transfer was gunpowder, first formulated by Chinese alchemists seeking an elixir of immortality. It was used for fireworks and simple incendiary weapons for centuries. The formula and its military applications traveled westward along the Mongol routes, reaching the Islamic world and then Europe by the 13th century. The arrival of cannons and handheld firearms revolutionized European warfare. It rendered the stone walls of feudal castles obsolete, consolidating power in the hands of centralizing monarchies and forever changing the political landscape. Finally, consider the abstract foundation of all modern science, advanced mathematics. The concept of zero, developed in India, along with the decimal system and algebra, were preserved, refined, and transmitted to Europe by Arab scholars like al-Khwarizmi, whose name gives us the word algorithm. These mathematical tools provided a new language for calculation, astronomy, and physics. They allowed thinkers to quantify the world with a precision previously impossible, directly enabling the scientific breakthroughs of figures like Copernicus and Galileo. So when we admire a Renaissance painting, we see the classical inspiration, but when we look at the world that painting emerged from, we see the hidden scaffolding. The ships that brought new wealth, the books that spread new ideas, the armies that reshaped kingdoms, and the equations that describe the cosmos, all relied on knowledge that had journeyed for centuries along the Silk Road. Europe's awakening was not a solitary event. It was the final link in a long, slow chain of transmission where the accumulated innovations of Asia finally reached a continent ready to reinvent them, and in doing so, reinvent the world. The most powerful cargo on the Silk Road was sometimes a story. From the 12th century onward, a tantalizing rumor began to circulate in the courts of Europe. a whisper that offered hope in an age of crusades and conflict. It spoke of a magnificent Christian king named Prester John, ruling a vast utopian empire somewhere in the mysterious East. His kingdom was said to contain wonders like the Fountain of Youth, a palace made of crystal, and an army of giants. More importantly, he was a devout Christian ally, poised to march westward and crush the forces of Islam from the rear. This was not just a fable, it was a geopolitical fantasy that shaped the course of history. But where did such a specific and persistent legend come from? Its roots are tangled in the real, but misunderstood, reports that trickled back along the Silk Road. European travelers and diplomats heard fragments about powerful Christian communities beyond the Islamic world. There were the Karaite Turks of Central Asia, a Mongol tribe that had converted to Nestorian Christianity centuries earlier. There was the distant and very real Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, which Europeans vaguely placed in India, and of course, there were the communities documented by the Nestorian stele in China itself. These disparate truths, filtered through thousands of miles of travel and translation, merged and magnified in the European mind. The vague became vivid, the scattered became singular. A mosaic of facts birthed a magnificent fiction. The legend took on a life of its own, especially after a forged letter, purportedly from Prester John himself, began circulating among European monarchs in the 12th century, describing his paradise in lavish detail. This myth had very real consequences. For generations, it directed the gaze of explorers and kings eastward. When the Portuguese, under Prince Henry the Navigator, began pushing down the African coast, a primary goal was to make contact with Prester John's kingdom and forge a strategic alliance. Vasco da Gama carried letters of introduction addressed to him. Christopher Columbus, upon reaching the Americas, initially believed he had found the outskirts of Prester John's domain. The search for this phantom king became a driving force of the Age of Discovery. This moment reveals a profound truth about how the Silk Road shaped the world. It was not merely a conduit for spices and silk, but for information and misinformation. The vast, imperfect network of communication turned faint signals into roaring myths. A European king, staring at a map full of blank spaces, could fill them with a dream of salvation, a dream powerful enough to launch ships into the unknown. The road carried not just what was, but what people desperately needed to believe. Phantom kings and lost libraries were echoes of a world that had seemingly vanished. Yet the strategic idea that powered the ancient Silk Road never truly died. It merely waited for a new age to give it form. In the 21st century, that idea has reemerged on a scale that would stagger even Kublai Khan. It is called the Belt and Road Initiative, and it is the 25th and final pivotal moment, a direct and deliberate echo of the past reshaping our global future. Announced in 2013, this is China's monumental project to build a modern web of connectivity across Eurasia and Africa. The name itself is telling. The Silk Road economic belt refers to overland corridors, while the 21st century maritime Silk Road charts new sea lanes. This is not nostalgia, it is a blueprint for a new world order built on infrastructure, where camel caravans once carried bolts of silk, massive freight trains now rumble along newly laid tracks. You can track a container from a factory in eastern China all the way to a distribution center in Germany, traversing Kazakhstan, Russia, and Poland in under 2 weeks, a journey that once took months. Where ancient ports like Aden and Malacca were vital hubs, modern deep-water ports are being built or expanded with Chinese investment, from Gwadar in Pakistan to Piraeus in Greece, creating a string of pearls along crucial maritime routes. And alongside the physical roads of steel and concrete runs, a digital Silk Road, a network of fiber optic cables and satellite links intended to transmit data as efficiently as the old routes transmitted spices. The parallels to history are profound. Like the Kushan Empire, this initiative seeks to control the vital crossroads, financing and building the highways, railways, and ports that will define 21st century trade. Like the Mongol Pax, it promises a new era of smoother, faster movement of goods under a unifying framework, though this one is economic rather than military. And like every empire that ever patronized the Silk Road, from Tang China to Abbasid Baghdad, it understands that whoever builds the roads writes the rules of the journey. The Belt and Road is about more than commerce, it is about influence. By financing infrastructure in developing nations, it creates deep economic interdependence, linking the fortunes of dozens of countries to Beijing's vision. It creates new markets for Chinese goods and secures access to the energy and raw materials needed to fuel its economy. In essence, it is using the ancient tools of connectivity, trade, and investment to project soft power and reshape the geopolitical map, ensuring that the center of gravity for the world's largest continent once again runs through the East. This modern moment proves that the Silk Road was never just a historical trade route. It is a perennial geopolitical strategy, the recognition that the heartland of Eurasia, when connected, holds the key to global influence. The caravans have been replaced by container ships, the silk scrolls by satellite signals, but the fundamental game remains the same: to build the roads that will carry the future, and in doing so, decide where that future is headed. So the road's final legacy is not a monument, but a mirror. 25 moments have shown us a path that was never just about geography. It was a living network for the most powerful forces humanity possesses. It carried the delicate nerves of diplomacy alongside bolts of silk. It transmitted profound faiths as readily as it spread devastating plague. It was a conduit for revolutionary ideas and raw, unyielding ambition. This network did not simply facilitate history, it actively forged it, making and breaking empires from Rome to Baghdad. It inspired the phantom of a Christian king in the East and revealed the real faces of Bronze Age Europeans preserved in Asian sands. Time and again, it accidentally connected worlds, setting in motion consequences like the capture of papermakers or the flight of a plague bacterium that no single traveler could ever have intended. Today, when we tap a screen to order a product made halfway across the globe, or watch news ripple across continents in seconds, we are not witnessing something entirely new. We are living in the long, deep shadow of those first camel caravans and daring envoys. Our modern world of intricate supply chains and instant digital cables is the latest iteration of an ancient truth that connection is the most transformative power of all. It is a story that began with a diplomat's desperate journey and echoes now in the rumble of freight trains across Eurasia. So tell me, which of these 25 moments fascinated you the most? Was it the hollow staff of the monks, the silent witness of the Nestorian steel, or the chilling efficiency of the Black Death? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more deep dives into the greatest mysteries and pivotal turns of our shared past, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. Until next time, keep exploring. Behind every legend of merchants and monks stood a creature of profound endurance. The two-humped Bactrian camel was not merely a beast of burden, it was a masterpiece of biological engineering, perfectly adapted to conquer the Silk Road's most brutal stretches. Its broad, padded feet walked effortlessly over shifting sand without sinking, a double row of long eyelashes and nostrils that could seal completely protected it from the desert's blinding, choking storms. Those iconic humps stored fat, not water, allowing it to travel for weeks on minimal food, while its thick, shaggy coat insulated it against the freezing nights of the high mountain passes. This was the ultimate desert ship, a living vehicle that could carry hundreds of pounds of cargo where no wheeled cart could ever roll, making the impossible journeys of the Silk Road a tangible, plodding reality. But even the mighty camel needed sanctuary. After a grueling day's march under the relentless sun, the sight of a caravanserai rising from the dusty horizon meant survival. These were not simple roadside inns, they were the indispensable infrastructure of an entire civilization's commerce. Picture a large, square fortress of sun-baked clay or stone, with high, windowless walls and a single heavy gate that could be barred at night. Inside that protective shell, a bustling microcosm unfolded. A central courtyard offered space for weary travelers to rest and animals to be unloaded. Surrounding it were stables for the camels, secure storage rooms for valuable goods, and Spartan lodgings where merchants, guards, and pilgrims from a dozen different lands would share food, stories, and news before the next day's trek. The caravanserai's genius was in its repetition. Spaced roughly a day's journey apart along the major routes, they formed a chain of safety across continents. Within those walls, deals were brokered, languages were learned, and faiths were discussed around communal fires. A Persian textile merchant might hear a rumor of political unrest in Chang'an from a Sogdian horseman, adjusting his prices before he even reached the next market. A Nestorian monk could find safe passage alongside a Buddhist pilgrim. These humble way stations were the unsung nodes in the network, the practical, human-scale answer to a vast geographic problem. They required no grand imperial decree to function, just the universal need for shelter and community. The Silk Road, for all its tales of emperors and explorers, was ultimately built and sustained by the steady rhythm of the camel's gait and the welcoming refuge of a walled courtyard at dusk, proving that history's greatest connections often rely on the simplest, most resilient forms of ingenuity.